Hey, Sean.
Hey, Alon. What's up? What are we up to today?
We just did a dev talk, the first ever dev talk with David Hellman, art lead and co-director on Arranger, a role puzzling adventure.
Which is the debut game from Furniture and Mattress LLC, the recently formed studio from Nick Sutner, David Hellman, Nicolas Recabaran, and Tomas Batista.
And it's out kind of everywhere. You can play on PC, you can play on phone. If you have a Netflix subscription, it's already free through Netflix games. It's great.
It was a wide-ranging conversation of where we talked with David about his creative process as an artist, about a lot of his creative choices on the game specifically. We got pretty detailed.
Sometimes you just talk about walking in the woods, and that's cool too.
Yeah, oddly enough, that's part of the game. It's all part of the game, baby.
It's all part of the game. And we didn't really actually talk about the game that much, which is just a really sticky, satisfying, unique, innovative puzzler. But I think puzzler sort of sells it short, but it is what it is.
It's right in the title. They're leading with, it's a fun portmanteau of puzzle. Was it role puzzling?
Role puzzling.
Role puzzling. But they're trying to be upfront that it is a puzzle game. That is the dominant. I mean, who's to say what the dominant mechanism of the game is? Because I think it is an effective blending of RPG overworld exploration and discrete puzzle challenges.
Yeah, exactly. But we're enjoying it. David was great, and let's get to the interview, I guess.
Sounds good by me. Roll the tape.
Welcome to Wide Flank.
Welcome to a Wide Flank Dev Talk. Today, Sean and I are joined by David Hellman, the art lead and co-director on Arranger, a role puzzling adventure. Hi, David. We're so happy to have you on for our first ever Dev Talk.
Hello. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Sean, where should we begin?
So to get right into it, I wanted to ask just a very broad question to start. What inspires you as an artist? And that can be, we can dive into that deeper if you want, but just starting real broad. What inspires you as an artist?
There are definitely themes and motifs I just keep coming back to. I mean, most simply and obviously, I love drawing trees. I love spooky forests and landscapes and things like that. I'm looking at the Arranger key art as a kind of prompt for me. So I'm just going to name things that are in this artwork. A magical girl, a sword, a little creature with spiral eyes.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know. I like imagery that has some kind of weird sense of mystery to it, or is goofy or funny. So there are various impulses. What inspires me? That is a broad question. Let's see. I don't know. I guess I feel like I have different sources of inspiration. One is just kind of hard to pin down feelings you have as a human being in the world. So things that are hard to resolve, like frustrated feelings or romantic feelings, or a sense of mystery when you're in nature. Maybe a sense of wanting to connect to the world, or the kind of seemingly expressive nature of the world, or expressive something inhabiting the world, some sense of a presence, which I don't really ascribe to an actual religious thing, but a kind of sense of communion with nature, maybe, or something like that, or not even nature, but just the environment. So there are a lot of things that kind of trigger and excite me creatively. I don't know. So that's a broad answer to a broad question, I guess.
Yeah, totally. Do you spend a lot of time in nature, or is there woods close to where you live, or?
Not right now. Well, I mean, I grew up next to a bit of forest,
Hmm.
where my parents' house was. So I've always liked to take walks and look at the world. And like now yeah, it's like more urban, but still kind of, like a lot of, like I like to walk and look at things and stuff will just strike me as having an interesting composition or interesting sense of presence or something like that.
So maybe the word is like environment, like the environment that you find yourself in, and like your motion through it is something that like,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think
is
that's
like a
true.
sure.
Yeah.
Is that also, I mean, I want to always sort of have a ranger in my mind, like sort of
Okay.
parallel to whatever conversation we're having. And I was just curious, like, does that also reflect in a ranger? You think that like you're pulling maybe some specific inspiration for the ranger art from similar places?
Yeah, for sure. Certainly like the forest environment, the first wilderness environment outside the
Hmm.
town was the first
Yeah.
one that really came together in this style. And the way those trees look, they're kind of they're peculiar and have like unique characters, one to the next. And um, something I had in mind was just the way like you'll see something that will strike you as unusual, and then you remember it, like a tree that there are trees that just kind of fade into the forest, like in a generalized sense. But
Hmm.
then there'll be one that has a lot of character for
Hmm.
some
Mm.
reason, like a weird shape, or it has a kind of very proud kind of shape, or it maybe is sagging and looks mournful or something like that. So all the trees I drew for Ranger have one of those aspects, hopefully.
That like singular sort of like that's the special tree. That's the one that like caught either Gemma. Like, is it like through Gemma's perspective? Is that the way you think of it, or is it just like a more generalized like
There are
a,
moments when
a
it's definitely her
perspective?
perspective,
Mm.
like when she first enters the forest. There are the shard comic panels that appear that are trying to say like she's hearing things, she's seeing things,
Mm.
like her footsteps on the ground, to really put you in her subjectivity. And then I think in
Mm.
general she's the protagonist, so yeah, you could say it's her viewpoint. But I guess I'm also just thinking of my own viewpoint or the player's viewpoint. This is getting ahead of things a bit, but like
Sure.
there is this way that in a ranger the art style tries to just exclude things that would be repetitious, like
Mm.
not to have 25 trees on screen, but have three that are memorable. Because I kind of think
Mm.
that's how perception works. Like you'll notice notice things that are unusual or speak to you or have
Mhm.
a particular evocative quality, and other things just kind of disappear into patterns. So in a ranger, we kind of polarize those things further. There's like the handful of trees on screen that are unique, that grab your attention, and then literally just like a pattern in the background, a
Yeah.
repeating tree pattern.
Totally. And that resonates with what you were saying about like the lived human experience of walking through the forest, and most of the trees are just trees, but
Yeah.
one is
Yeah.
interesting or twisted or
Yeah. I'm interested in that subjectivity, I guess, of like
Hmm.
how we actually perceive things and what speaks to us and what becomes generalized, I
Sure.
guess.
And also just in a blunter, down to earth way, I'm glad that you referred to it as comic panels,
Oh
because
yeah.
off mic I was calling them vignettes, and
Okay.
Alon was
I was
like,
calling them frames, and I was like,
the,
"That's wrong. I know it's wrong."
at a certain at a certain point, Alon was like the rectangles from comics, and I was like, he'll find the word.
Yeah, I'll find the word. Found panels.
um,
I wanted to piggyback off what you were saying just a little bit in a ranger, because I did notice I didn't fully complete the game, but I played a few hours, and the what I wrote in my notes is like the areas feel different, but I'm not sure how, because it is so minimal, like the amount of art that's on your screen, right? It's like you're looking at a grid. Let's say it's like a 10 by 10 grid or whatever, and there's a subtle pattern on the tiles, and there's a pattern in the background, and there's very few objects that are actually like the puzzle that you're sort of interacting with on the tile. but the world always felt unique to me. Like I was just like, oh, I'm in the water world and everything's really watery. You know what I mean? And I was just, I guess my question was just sort of like, how did you approach making them feel so different? One after another one.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, certainly like the palette has to shift from place to place.
Mm.
So like the temperature, the color temperature, you start, say you're outside in the first town and there's a lot of yellow, but then you go into the basement and it's purple. So just
Mm.
try to always create a good transition so you really feel there's
Mhm.
a change.
Mm.
And then yeah, certainly like I try to differentiate the towns and the different natural like wilderness biomes pretty strongly. So there's like a dominant color in each. The forest has a lot of blues and greens, and then the jungle there's more like purple, and there's a lot of green and blue in the water, but there's a lot of purple, which
Mm.
feels like a different weird thing. And then the desert, of course, like a lot more orange and stuff. So yeah, I guess there's certain scenes that are more pared down. Like I think some of the caves become pretty minimal, but yeah, in other cases there are quite a few. Like there's textures and yeah, there are kind of a relatively few like scenery objects that are being repurposed.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
hopefully it's enough that it still feels like there's variety, sort of frame to frame. Like if you were to screenshot at any point, there isn't too much repetition. In the scenery. But then we got textures and background textures, and then the comic panels, or we call them, actually our word for them was shards. That's my like
Okay.
highfalutin word.
Okay.
We'll use
Um,
that. Yeah.
But that's
Shards.
the idea of like fragmentation, of like you're only seeing a part of a thing.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then you kind of perform an act of closure to fill in the rest. Mentally, like what else is there? But yeah, fragmentation in terms of like only depicting part, but also fragmenting your viewpoint so that there's like a diversity of viewpoints, like looking up, looking
Mhm.
down, looking at things close, like looking at the horizon, and that's all stuff made possible by those by the shards, by the comic panels.
Yeah.
Um,
For the listener, like it's you go into say a bedroom or something or a house, and there'll be one shard on the right and one shard on the left, and it'll be like a dirty bed and like a desk with lots of stuff on it, or a window with that you can see the forest out of, and like that kind of, yeah, like you're saying, like the closure that you kind of create is like I'm in a bedroom now and it's a 3D space, even though I'm looking at like a 2D top down game, you know?
yeah, exactly, and that was one of the more exciting things for me. I mean, I felt like I needed to break the rules somehow to get interested and to have a challenge to
Mm.
solve. So and just to differentiate the game from everything else out there, and to not compete directly with all the virtuosic artists out there who can render things incredibly well. But yeah, like um typically games commit to one viewpoint. Certainly if it's a 2D game and it's
Mhm.
an overhead game, everything is depicted at a certain scale and you're just kind of stuck with that. But in a Ranger, because the gameplay all happens on the grid in a very like a tightly defined way, a quantized sort of way, tile to tile. Um, as long as that part is depicted really clearly and you can see where those gameplay objects are living on the tiles and how they interact, then the stuff around it can be a lot more impressionistic, not just in like a painting style, but like
Mm.
you can just, I could, what I wanted to do is put you in the world using a variety of techniques and like pictorial styles, basically. So
Mhm.
instead of depicting everything very evenly and consistently, there are like representative objects, a handful of trees or something near the grid. But then,
Yeah.
we shift to like other modes, like there's a texture background or a pattern that looks like you're looking up at the sky, like looking straight up through the trees, which is in the
Mhm.
background, which is a spatial
Mhm.
contradiction, should be in front, not in back. And then like the panels, which show you close-ups of like a mug of tea with the steam rising, something that would be like a tiny detail. And you might
Mm.
have like a little evocative
Mhm.
tiny animation of the steam rising or something, which could work nicely. But is just a different approach. You can get close on the T, and that's like, yeah, again, more. I feel like our perception is more fragmented and more like collecting those impressions of the things that we focus on that grab our attention. I'm kind of coming back to the same idea a few times in different ways.
Yeah, no,
hopefully
it's really interesting.
makes sense to listeners.
I was going to affirm it in terms of like, because you already were talking about the notion of subjectivity in the game and like subjectivity in people's experiences. And like, so much of what I've gotten from the game has to do with like what I'm perceiving and like how much of the game is happening in the player's mind versus like on the page as such. And like, interestingly enough, I think that that occurs both like in terms of how the puzzles are designed and in terms of how the narrative is communicated. And I'm trying to cook up a question in real time as I'm sketching this out.
Take your time.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Because the initially I was going to ask, like, how do you just focus? Like, let's just focus on the shards a little bit for goodness sake. Like, how do you differentiate between some of the shards depict images that are like just like a still scene setting kind of moment, like it's a picture of a chair. But early on in the game, there was this moment where we see an open window and the shard sort of communicates information that like the game design hasn't yet revealed, because it's like we see the open window and then you solve a puzzle and like a pathway opens and a character says something like, oh, the window's open, and it's like there is a relationship at that point between narrative design and your art. I guess it's like, how do you process out like when to depict those sort of motivating images as opposed to like out of time, just like this is a scenario type image? Or like, do you think about it that way? Or
there are definitely different styles of shards, or shards that have a few different behaviors.
mm-hmm.
The examples you pick are interesting. Not how I would have broken it down, but I'm sure you're picking up on something there. Well, you're talking about like the view out the window and then the chair, and there's something different between the two. Is it because the view out the window shows you something that's further ahead, that is not your immediate environment?
I think I was thinking about it in like a time oriented way.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Like the chair. Sorry, continue.
No, go ahead, please.
Something about like the chair as like sitting there, like, and the chair is there, like whether, I mean, I suppose both things are there, whether the player is interacting with them or not. But it's, I think the thing I'm really zeroing in on is the fact that like we don't overtly interact with the chair at all, whereas the open window becomes something that is like interacted with and motivated by the player in a way, and like occurs in time, and like you pass through the window.
Oh, well, the window has a parallax effect as well. So when you move, you see it's effectively like an animation that you see. But
really?
The view outside moves a little bit relative to the window.
Okay.
Maybe. Well, there's definitely some Scott McCloudy type stuff to talk about with the shards, the panels.
Sure.
Particularly to distinguish between the shards that are always present and those that appear and disappear as you move through the scene. Like in the very beginning of the game, you play as another character hustling through the rain, through a forest scene while it's raining, carrying something in her arms, and it's like a little story sequence. As you proceed, panels, the shards appear and disappear as you like go down the path, and the shards are depicting the character that you are playing as in these moments as she's like moving through. So it'll be a close-up of her face showing some distress, or her feet splashing through puddles. Those shards are attached to a specific moment in time, and are kind of like a live, like almost like a live cut scene happening as you move. And are linked to your position too. So if you were to backtrack, then like the footfall tiles appear again.
Sure.
So it's a very comic booky kind of thing where the
Yeah.
time and space are connected in a particular way, and these moments are like transient. But it's the fact that you can rewind by going backwards is maybe just like an odd artifact of like how we implemented this, which was the most direct thing, which is just to tie it to like a spatial trigger. So when you're in a certain place, it appears, which seemed to do well enough because these are like forward progression scenes. You're not expected to backtrack.
Yeah.
But those feel different to me than like the more common shards, which just always live in one position in the scene. They're always there, which is just like any other scenery object. Those ones don't feel as like connected to a moment in time. Those depict things that are present as long as you're there, like just like a tree is there as long as you're there. There's no change that you observe. So there's definitely a distinction there.
And I'm trying my best to like not get sucked into like a philosophical conversation about like everything's always changing and like the tree isn't the same 1 second to another. But it's like we are talking about like a work of art that's rendered and realized and presented.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it. It can get a little too. I mean, at some point, you have to kind of catch yourself and say, like, what's the functional difference here? But I totally thought about all that stuff in kind of trying to establish the style. And there are a lot of like fine distinctions you get to. Like, one thing that did come up was when I first started introducing these shards. One of the first ones I did, well, I had like a view of the sun shining through the tree branches. Don't know if that's, I don't know if that's in there. There is something like that.
There's a striking shot in the forest, I think, and there's like a few birds in front of the tree, and you're like looking through the leaves. Yeah,
I'm just visualizing the first version I did, but yeah, but that is in there. And I also did an image which I was excited about because you can't show that normally. If like you're thinking of like an overhead Zelda game or something, you can't show looking up at the trees at the sun. So to me, it was like a very exciting thing that puts you subjectively in that location in a way that like you can't do otherwise. But I also had a panel of Gemma, the main character, with her face kind of looking curious, looking around, and the feedback from the team at that point, they were kind of acclimating to this new. We were like a third into development, and I was like changing the whole art approach. So they were kind of like, okay, let's see if this works. Yeah. So they were, I think, intrigued, but there was a little bit of caution about some of these things, and one was like that to depict the main character Gemma, who is already present on screen as the character sprite that you're moving, had a strange like disassociative feeling or a doubling or something. And and feedback from team members was, can we only have one depiction at a time? Because
interesting,
it's like sort of distressing or feels wrong that they're multiple. Ultimately, we do depict Gemma in the shards, but only in the ones that appear and disappear, which to me, like I was leaping head first into this whole new like world of like we can fragment and depict things multiple ways and stuff. So I wasn't troubled by it, but on reflection, I do understand that. I think there's a weird feeling, and it has more to do with time. That's what I decided. It had more to do with like the transience of it. Like if you are walking down the path and there's a picture of your character's face that appears and disappears as you go, it feels like a moment in time that may, like a reflection of your of her feeling in the moment, or like she's noticing something or hearing something, or her again the footfalls, feet in the puddles or whatever. But if you enter the scene and you see a picture of your face that's already there, it's eerie. It's like it's like walking into a room that has like a bunch of portraits of you or something. It's like, did I sit for these portraits? I don't remember that.
It's like an intervention. You're just like, well, hey now, what's happening?
It's also confrontational in a way, like an actor staring down the camera, just like welcome.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the time and the place for this, but I did want to make sure to get it in there. But I was just curious how making art for a video game is different than making art for art's sake, for lack of a better phrase. I mean, because you're communicating so many things that will then be, you're communicating functionality and you're communicating things that will be interacted with, and you're almost like product designing in a weird way versus just making an art that will be making art that will be looked at.
Right. I mean, yeah, I always keep in mind that it's a game. So to me, that means I actually feel like the art is subservient to the game design and the player's experience, the player's agency. I always think of it that way. So like if there's, if I'm talking with Nico Reckabaron, who's the game designer for Ranger, if there's ever, like, my first question is, how does this thing function? What does the player need to understand about the affordances present? What can you do with this thing? What can you not do? What is it like? Is this object like other objects? For example, is it a locked door? There are multiple locked doors, but they behave differently. One can be opened with a key. One opens arbitrarily when some other event occurs, for example. So these two things have to appear similar, so the player will notice these are both, this is what a locked door looks like in this world, but I can notice that this one has a keyhole, which implies I need a key for it. This one just has like a padlock icon, which just tells me it's locked, so that's a very like helpful and grounding thing for me, because it's like there's a clear priority list. And sometimes I don't adhere well enough, and then usually it's a matter of like fixing that later. Like, for example, when I kind of late in development, I realized that the shards were just too bright, and they were distracting attention a bit too much. And I think they still are a bit too bright in some cases, but in others, I adjust the value so they're dimmer. This is to achieve the appropriate visual hierarchy wherein the gameplay space is the most foregrounded and draws the most attention. So the tile grid is the brightest. The objects and characters on the grid are high contrast. As you go back in space, in parallax space, things get lower contrast and darker in general. This was kind of hard to do also in some outdoor environments, which feel like they should be bright. So I had bright backgrounds and then a bright grid, and it was just too many things like, and I think it's because I was excited. It was partly that sense that like this should be a bright environment, so that somehow I have to figure out how to make the background bright. And then also just wanting the shards to be like exciting and pop out. But later when I just was like, okay, let's just push it further back, darken it, it just felt much better right away. So like the area where you meet the after town one, after the forest, you meet this mysterious painter guy. His environment, like the background was a lot brighter because it was a sky. The more I just pushed it dark, the more the whole thing felt correct, and your eye goes to the right thing. So yeah, that stuff, it's always like better to follow the rules sometimes.
Sure.
Break them and then kind of adhere to them, maybe.
yeah, there's always both. It's got to do both. You got to break the rules and follow the rules. I don't know when you do each one.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
It changes.
Yeah.
So there's a few things in that section that like I wanted to seize upon, like, because when you're making choices about how bright the environment that the player is within, like when that's a major consideration, it starts to open up questions and thoughts about like the immersion of the space of the game. And that was like one of the first things I clocked in the game, is like, this is a game that is both like hard-edged, like puzzle design, puzzly puzzles, like single stage puzzles, essentially, reconciled with an not an open world as such, but like an overworld setting. And so I have a question that's like, given that the overworld tends to be like, would you agree with the notion that the overworld tends to be more representational or like overtly representational than like the interior puzzle spaces? Or like, is that me putting too much of myself in it?
No, I think you're right. I think it's because the overworld has more scenery. Like when you go inside, it's more, there's just a grid, tile grid with objects on it. Some shards, usually like depicting the chair, a close up of a chair, close up of a mug of tea, and then just a background pattern, which is more like a production reality that we couldn't do scenery for everything. So interiors got simplified.
Okay,
that way. Yeah.
Interesting.
Because yeah, even as I'm like sketching out those thoughts, it's like it's not like the overworld doesn't have puzzly interactions, and it's not like the interiors aren't like realized spaces. It's like there is this ongoing relationship between the two. So like, I guess to ask a slightly more focused question, it's like, how do you describe? I'm trying to figure out which one to zoom in on, the puzzles or the overworld, and truly my curiosity lies more with the overworld, and that's why I came in with talking about the light and things like that. That it's like, how do you think about the rendering of the overworld in this game? Like, how do you think about rendering like the reality of the immersive spaces where Gemma is more wandering around as opposed to like finishing a more discrete task that's right in front of her?
Well, I mean, some of those interior puzzles, you're going more from room to room, and it's true, you're kind of more focused on a puzzle and it may be more of a brief experience. So I think to have less scenery is like adequate, because it's more about focusing on the puzzle. But when you're outside, it's a more sustained thing where you're in a forest, and I really want to like sell that feeling that you're in the forest. So I think it's worthwhile to have more developed scenery and fill out the atmosphere more. Also, there's just, I don't know, this is another production reality thing. There are only a handful of outdoor biomes. So like the forest, the desert, and so like, and then the towns are their own biomes in a sense, their own scenery. So like you spend the most time out there. So I wanted to make sure those all felt really rich. When you go inside, there are actually a lot of different types of interiors. And so kind of keeping that simpler made more sense. But I feel like you're actually asking me something else. Like, I'm not sure I'm answering what you're really interested in.
I mean, there is like a blunter question that I just checked off, and now I'm unchecking it, which is, what do you think the relationship is between those two like types of spaces, like underworld and overworld, essentially, to use like the Zelda terminology?
Well, and there's a particular thing in Zelda. I'm not sure it's quite the same in Arranger, but like in the Zelda games, the kind of my idealized version of those two spaces and their relationship is that one is a kind of nonlinear exploration space, and one is like a focused trial that would strengthen you and prepare you to return to the kind of nonlinear space with some new tools or understandings. And I do think that's kind of how those games work in particular, even like Breath of the Wild and then these newer ones kind of pretty much follow that, I think. I mean, actually, there's a lot of freedom in how you solve the puzzles in the shrines, but they do like require you to focus and achieve one thing. So, and often they're like designed to demonstrate some particular behavior or some particular feature of the physics. I think in Arranger, actually, this is more of a question really for Nico.
I was about to say, is this more of a designer question than
I think so. I mean,
question? Yeah,
I can try, but like it's really like Nico would have the more informed firsthand answer. But I mean, I think Arranger's more about an overall like sequential thing. So you start the game and you're introduced to the mechanics, and then Nico has come up with a whole series of like clever variations, none of which outstay their welcome. So they're all based on the basic idea of the basic behavior of like how you move on the tile grid.
Yeah.
Right. But then like he introduces a whole series of twists on that. As he says, each one is just like the honeymoon phase, and then he moves on to the next thing. So it's like a lot of marriages, I guess.
Sure.
But
Yeah,
but yeah, so I think there's that sense of like novelty and some kind of focusing on one new behavior as you progress through a dungeon. And then, yeah, I'm not sure. Actually, I don't know. Sorry, I guess I don't have a great answer.
You don't.
No problem.
You've said a bunch of interesting things. And also, it's not. Yeah, totally.
I have to think about how like the puzzles in the outdoor areas relate to the puzzles inside. Like, I guess, like for example, in the second wilderness, which is the jungle, Nico introduces the raft. So you first find the raft, which is a really cool item that lets you move on the water freely, which is totally different from the grid, the typical movement on the grid. And there are some optional challenging puzzles with the raft right there at the beginning, but you can totally just use the raft in the more obvious way to progress. And it's just getting you comfortable with that. Then in the next area, the raft is involved in more challenging puzzles in different ways. So I think he's kind of laying down some new ideas, which will come into play later. But
like creating those relationships. I think I was like trying to like figure out how to ask you about like whether there is a major distinction in your process of creating visuals for the different spaces too. Do you organize, like how do you organize ideas for the overworld as opposed to ideas for the interiors, or is that like not part of how you think about the creation process at all?
One thing that distinguishes the exterior spaces from the interior spaces is that when you're outside, you can see a lot further. It's a big open space. So the interiors are often more about a feeling of claustrophobia or just what's immediately around you. But outside, if it's like a conventional Zelda-like viewpoint, you're just looking down at the ground, you can only see your immediate surroundings. But because of the shards, we can show things in the distance. And I like to use this for establishing landmarks and seeing things from far away that you'll travel to and later have a different viewpoint on. So from the first outdoor environment, well, not the first, but after you leave your house, the town one outside area, I'm trying to establish that this is a town surrounded by a wall. The wall is only a thing that you would, in a conventional overhead view game, you would only see it when you're near the perimeter of the town. Otherwise, it would be like completely out of sight, out of mind. But I wanted it to be really like strong presence in everywhere you go. And of course, if you were like really there, it would be the backdrop everywhere. Right. So I wanted to create that sense of enclosure, of like safety, but also like the limits of this space, which is, and that's what kind of is really characterizing this location and this part of the story, that Gemma is safe, but also confined. So the wall, I want it to be really seen everywhere. And also there's a large gate with like an interesting like figure above it, like this gardener figure, this guy with a beard and a hat and everything.
Right. Totally.
So that you see from multiple places, and it's trying to like get you thinking about, aware that you're going to leave and aware of the exit that's always there, but also think about this figure and what he really represents and like how people relate to him, and kind of and that ties in as well to like the major landmark in the center of the entire world, which is this large monument called the Hold, which you see from different viewpoints throughout the game and has different attitudes depending where you stand.
I was talking about this with Alon too, about like where to slide in some talk about Second Quest. And again, without like spoiling Second Quest, like there's similar, because it's an image that's like in all sorts of art, but like these types of images that you sometimes summon that are like a single character beholding like a vast expanse. To craft a question out of that, it's like, where does your interest in that type of imagery come from? Or like, yeah, like what do you get out of those types of images?
I guess just, since I like looking at the world, I like places where you can see a lot of the world. And I guess it's just very rich with things that you will then later encounter close up. I guess I'm interested in that difference between seeing something from far away versus close up, and how it appears differently, and how I guess like the play of anticipation versus presence with a thing. I don't know. There's just something fascinating about that to me. Like, you can inflect that in like a horror direction too. Like when you see a predator from far away, how do you feel?
Right.
And
Sure.
you're anticipating that presence, like it could be right in front of me if it closes the distance very soon.
Totally.
Or like something that looks kind of modest far away, but when you're standing in front of it, you realize how big it is and how imposing it is, and how you feel diminished or you feel like humbled by it or something like that. So, and I guess it's also just a way to create anticipation and excitement. Like you're standing here looking out at the whole world, and you can see, see landmarks that look peculiar, that catch your attention, and it allows you to anticipate being there later. And then so maybe when you, if you see like an egg with a weird crack in it from far away, like a huge egg, then when you get there, you'll go, oh, this is the big egg. And you'll maybe feel kind of like a sense of closure, or like, I made it all the way here. And then also like, I'm interested in the continuity of experience. So like if you begin one place, you walk, and then you're in another place, just experiencing this space is interesting to me, and how it kind of transitions and transforms. I guess this discussion is a lot. You guys invited me to just talk about what interests me. So I don't know if these are like interesting to other people, but to me, they're just innately very interesting. And
hey, they're interesting to us, and that's what this is all about.
One would hope that this is interesting to other people.
I was just gonna sort of backtrack. We're kind of jumping all over the place, which I think is totally great. But I'm just curious, you're the co-director on Arranger, you're art lead on Arranger. I'm wondering like how much of this, like what the process of making these artistic decisions that you're talking about, like are these largely coming from you and presenting to the crew, or is it coming from Nico being like, I want to represent this, and then you're sort of like executing on, a project sort of, or like, do you know what I mean? I'm just curious about like how that kind of worked on the game.
Well, the company was formed by me, Nico Reckabaron, and Nick Sutner, who was wrote the scripts, story lead, and business development and producer, and like pulled everyone together basically. And then very shortly after, we brought in Tomas Batista for audio and music, and he's fantastic. So it was kind of like the three of us, the original three, are kind of co-directing. Tommy was present from early on as like always kind of present, like pitching in ideas and kind of generating inspiration with his music and stuff. But like there's a lot of by the nature of a kind of co-directing premise, there was just a lot of consensus seeking, particularly early on. I think during pre-production in the early stages, there was a lot of discussing the ideas together. I mean, it all started from the puzzle design and the basic mechanics.
Right.
Again, like going back to, my attitude about the art for a game, it all goes back to reflecting the puzzle design and the mechanics. So,
right.
And what the player will do. So just to like sidebar on that for a second, as an example, we all were like looking at Nico's design, which from the beginning was kind of a Rubik's cube put onto a 2D plane with RPG elements, like characters and monsters and stuff, and seeing how they would interact with all the tile sliding. And it was functionally like the same as the final game. That is, you could loop around the edge. You're sliding swords into monsters, which are stationary. You're dealing with like objects that don't move, which are static for some reason. Before we had the concept of, so then we had to come up with like narrative justifications for these things. And the main one, I guess, being the static as like a substance in the world that makes things not move on the grid. Right. And then from there, also the idea of like static as in kind of spiritually stuck or like unwilling to allow change to occur, and what that would do to people, what that does to people. And like the main character being exempt from that, or being able to loop and move in this unique way, made her natural kind of like opponent of this kind of spiritual stuckness, which, you know, so like as you play the game and as you solve a lot of puzzles, you're likely to make a mess on the way to putting things into the right order. You have to kind of allow a mess to occur as you push through your sort of confusion, uncertainty, see how things work. You know, like certainly with the sliding tile puzzles, you have to like sort of mess them up before you put them back together. So that was an idea that we discussed, that this idea of like allowing some chaos to occur on the way towards putting things in the right order was in the gameplay, in the player experience, and so should be reflected in the narrative. So like the story, the kind of basic like ideas of the story and some of these things were definitely like decided jointly, you know, and like some of the stuff that feels like a second quest echo, like the big monument. I mean, there's also a big statue in Second Quest. Some of this stuff was more for me. And there are other elements that were like very much Nick, and Nick wrote the story, and Nick is like the story lead, but there was definitely like a blending that occurred early on. And then I think as it progressed, there was degree less consensus seeking and more just, we're responsible for our respective departments. So like, you know, the art just has to get done. So we all kind of like pitch in and offer feedback and say, what if it was more like this or that? But like, eventually it's like, I'm going to do it this way, and it's getting done, you know? So it was different. I guess there was some, the good thing was that we were all like we're all very good friends, and we all kind of had an innate wish to kind of please each other. And that was often a guiding thing, because it's just natural. You want your friends that you're working with to laugh at the jokes you're writing, to like the characters you're drawing, to be excited. And that's a kind of natural like social element of creativity. But at the same time, they're co-directing just consumed a lot of energy. I don't know if I'm like eager to repeat that specifically, because everybody has to kind of be on, like, you just have to discuss everything. Everyone has to like be on top of everything. So there's no one, for example, who's like creative director who just takes a lot of meetings and oversees and is guiding. Everybody's responsible for like producing a lot within their area, and also kind of looking at everything else and directing and kind of weighing in on everything. So, I mean, maybe that I had more challenge with that than some others, but it's kind of a tough thing to pull off.
That's always like a tough thing, I think, for an artist. You know, I've done some artistic stuff. Sean's a musician, like that push and pull of being like, we're going to take this like super seriously, and we're a company, and take meetings and being like, no, I just want to like art out and make stuff, you know, and like get into my good creative space. That's a tough one.
Yeah. And go for it. What were you going to say, David?
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's just the nature of creativity for me, is that it has to be like protected and cultivated. Like if you're trying to grow a plant or something, like you can't just be like, the plant goes in the closet because that's the only room for it and it's going to grow. It doesn't work that way. You have to say like, what does the plant need? So like for me, sort of saying like, well, you're going to take a day of meetings and then you're going to be creative at 3 p.m. I'm sorry. It just doesn't work that way. And I mean, everybody's different and has their own rhythms, but, you know, that was just the thing to work out that was definitely a challenging aspect of development. But like, that's not to say that like anyone forced me to do anything unfairly. Like it was my responsibility to like support the other team members and to be on top of what else was going on and to provide that like important feedback and maintain that awareness of the project. So that's what we signed up for. You know, that's what we did.
Yeah.
Sure. So we've gotten very, very like deep into the thematic stuff, and then we just got really high level like what it's like to be a co-owner of a business, essentially, right? Like, or like, it's I do want to like zoom a little bit more in on like what Alon was saying about like the push and pull of like being, and also what you were saying, David, of like you're making all these creative choices while also having to be on top of like higher level concerns in the game. Like, I don't even know what the question is. I think I'm just trying to affirm that like that is an ongoing push and pull, and there is like something of a smooth transition, which I kind of wanted to slide in, which was like, is Furniture and Mattress at a point where you're discussing your next projects? Is that something you're comfortable talking about at this point? Are you working on anything that you're like more personally like excited about? Like what's next for David Hellman?
Well, right now we're just, we just launched the game, and I mean, in a way, I'm almost surprised like how the time is flying. Like, I feel like I'm in this phase post development, but it's been a few months now. I don't know when I'm going to feel like fully recuperated, because like the early part of the year was very intense and hard work. But like we delivered the game. The game. Our porting team at 22nd Century Toys had like our final deliverable in hand early May, and then there were a few weeks, and then we were in certification, and we had a trip. We went to LA and New York to show the game in a couple events, and so there's been a kind of celebratory period, but also, I think overall within the team, there's like still a fair amount of stress launching the game. I've been the least stressed, because I think there's just a switch in my brain that went from like a high level of stress before the game was delivered to letting go of it, like feeling like highly responsible and kind of putting all energy possible into it, and really like probably to the detriment of my health. Which is not, I'm not glorifying that. It was just kind of like, I was desperate for the game to be as good as it could be and not feel like I had like let anybody down by not giving it my all. So that was my own struggle, but there's still been some work to do supporting it, but I feel like that sense of release of like, I let this go now. Like anything that happens from here is sort of, in the hands of fate more than like anything I can control. There's more work. Like Nick is still very busy as like doing the business development stuff, and and Nico has bug fixing and stuff like that. But anyway, it's just been a different feeling and a transitional period, and so there's no announcement from the company about like what's up next. I think it's kind of, frankly, kind of wide open at the moment. I think it's been hard to like visualize or commit to like next projects. So I'm personally doing some like training and just trying to grow and develop some ideas. So like I'm dabbling around in 3D a little bit. I mentioned when we got on the call, I'm playing around in Crocodile 3D. We'll see where that goes. I don't know if that'll be the next project, but it's something I wanted to develop for a long time. And I have ideas for like extending the whole shards thing, the comic panels, I think could be developed further. So maybe there's a game that leans further into some of the storytelling possibilities there. So yeah, there's some, and these guys, this team is amazing. So if we have an opportunity to work together again, I don't know if that's a follow up to Arrange or something completely different. Like I'm just speaking very totally speculating right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're all great friends, and it's been a real privilege to work together. So I think that there's always that possibility that we'll crack into something new, but who knows right now.
We hope so.
Yeah. Alon, I want to give you space to ask a question.
I don't know if I had something like on the tip of my tongue. I think, Sean, you do.
Yeah, we're in the edit out zone. But no, truly, like I wanted to ask, because you're talking so much about like the gritty reality of putting together like a serious work and releasing it and processing it. And what do you do to rest?
What do I do to rest?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing, even when the project was the most intense, I was consistently like working out and making meals and then listening to YouTube videos and podcasts and stuff. Taking walks, like I make sure I get outside and take walks. It's tough when, I don't know. I don't know if I figured this out, I think I did a good job not just sort of sitting in a chair doing like the Mountain Dew and pizza regimen. That I guess is like the classic thing for
classic, yeah.
Gamer lifestyle.
Yeah.
But I feel like, in a weird way, I feel like my life gets absorbed fully by one thing at a time, and then other things are just sort of floating around the periphery. So now that the project is over, I've noticed that it's like in a way there's been relief, but the relief can quickly turn to a different weird anxiety about like, what am I supposed to be doing now? And then like sometimes weird habits emerge, like why am I spending all my time on this or that? So I think it's important to like slow down and rest, but I think I'm figuring out how to like correctly direct my energies. And then I need a job. So
Sure.
I need to just get a job.
There.
Amen.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do
we
you
need
think?
jobs that just let us walk around and make meals, and then we're it's the best of both worlds.
Do you have any thoughts on this stuff about how to rest? You guys are very productive and busy.
I want to affirm what you said, which is that like it's an ongoing thing to figure out. Like it's every day kind of like work. It's not work. It's the opposite of work. I've been taking baths. If you can make time to take a bath and like play solitaire in the tub.
Okay, cool.
Big recommendation from me.
Nice.
That's been great. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big walker. Love a walk. Watch a TV show or something. I often find that things are so scrambled, and the only thing that sort of organizes my thoughts are I got to write stuff down. I got to be like, these are the actual priorities and the order of things that needs to be done. And like, that lets me sort of be like, okay, this thing that I'm stressing really hard about, actually don't need to think about this till Sunday, and that's far away, and I'm okay, So I get trapped in there. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Time management type things.
Seriously. I mean, maybe that's what we like about puzzle games, as humans, is that, because like, well, I had this like note that maybe Sean was referencing earlier where I was just like, are all games puzzle games? But that's like a different question. But what I was about to say is just sort of like the flow of this game is like, it's not the type of game, and I know you guys know this, but maybe listeners don't know this. It's not the type of game where you're like walk around a world and then a puzzle presents itself to you. Like the puzzling mechanic is constant in this game. Like you never are not on the grid. You're always like moving the world around you. And I like that a lot. And then you kind of get to a puzzle, move on. You're always moving stuff around. Gemma's always like messing stuff up and then trying to fix stuff that she messed up. And I'll like to relate this to kind of what we were just talking about is just like you kind of get that euphoric feeling of figuring something out. And then the game is like, okay, now go do it like a million more times. And that's like
Mhm.
sort of the rhythm of this game for me. And I think Sean, you too. Like we were just kind of both playing this and we would message each other on Discord like, I'm stuck on a puzzle. And then the other
Yeah.
person would just say, you'll figure it out. Because it's
Right.
just like you feel very safe in this game
Mm-hmm.
in a way that I don't always feel. And it's like, like you just keep messing stuff up. Like you'll get there. Like very much like those, you kind of mentioned a slide puzzle, like those physical wooden slide puzzles. You just got to keep messing it up and you'll get the thing to the other side of the board eventually.
Yeah, it's great to hear your impressions of playing it. I guess it's that you develop some faith in yourself to get through the
Mm.
struggle.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, to connect that to what you were saying before, David, it's like, it's about subjectivity. It's about like an individual's experience of the world. And like, I don't want to tell you about what the game that you made is
Please.
about.
It's out there now. It belongs to the players now.
It's ours. It's ours now. No. But truly, there's so many moments in the game that are like well expressed. Like this is how an individual makes choices, and this is how like other individuals can learn from other individuals to like make their own choices. And there's so many subjective experiences on display in the game, and I just wanted to affirm that basically.
Great.
Yeah. So. I think that's going to.
I think
more
that's a
or less
podcast.
Wrap up the what's the word for first? The
Inaugural.
Inaugural. Thank you. That's going to wrap up the inaugural dev talk. Wide flank : dev talk. Huge thank you to David Hellman for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And again, I'm thrilled that this is the first. Can't wait to see who else is on.
Heck yeah. Us too. Alon, is there anything you want to add?
That's it. That's a wrap. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks, David. Thanks, Sean. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.